And my brother was telling me the story just the other day. He says it was flat, calm, nice, beautiful June night. They walked over to the backside, all the way over, because the beach was quite broad then. And they go, geez, we're not going to catch anything here. This wasn't even a wave breaking on the beach. And anyways, they baited up a hook with a seal worm, tossed it in, boom! As soon as it hit, they had bass, and they caught, I don't know, I think they had 5 or 6 boxes of all these small bass that they caught that night. And of course, it was a struggle for them because they had to drag them all back over to the back, load them all in the boat, take the boat to the fish pier, take them out of the boat, drag them up to Nicky's father's fish market. And Nicky's father didn't want them for his market because they had a lot of sand on them or something like that from dragging them across the beach. So they shipped them to the New York market, and they made some pretty good money out of it. So that was one way for them to go fishing.
I can tell you about my first striped bass because I remember it clear as can be. I was 13. I had a boat in the Herring River in Harwich, and I had a mooring there. I can tell you where I caught the fish. The lure I used, it was 22 inches. I had a friend that yelled at me for releasing it. The size limit was 24. And he said, take that fish home and eat it. But I let it go. So I can remember that. I think most people have that experience. They're such a beautiful fish. They're so fun to catch, and they remember it.
And I can remember when I was working at the fish market, it was usually Nicky, the youngest Willard, and his grandfather sometimes. In May and June, they'd take a short trawl and they'd go up into Orleans, only on a full moon. And well, before that, when there was a full moon coming, they'd go down to the trap docks in Stage Harbor in the spring, and they'd get squid for bait. And the squid had to be just a certain condition. It couldn't be too old, had to be just right for these guys. Anyways, they'd take the squid, and at night they'd go up onto the flats, full moon with an upcoming tide, and they'd set a 50 to 100 hook trawl up on the edge of the flats, because the bass will come up onto the flats when the tide's high to feed. And they were pretty successful at that. They'd come back with 300 or 400 pounds sometimes. So that was something that I remember watching those guys doing that and kind of fascinated by it. But once again, they wouldn't tell you too much. Ask where they're going, and just up northeast of the island, which is a general. Someone asks you where you're going fishing, east of the buoy, right? That's what buoy? Well, yeah.
I think people are naturally competitive about marine fishing to begin with. Striped bass might be the pinnacle of that. You just can't tell everybody everything you know about striped bass fishing.
I think so. I think that kind of goes with fishing in general, whether you're at a trout stream or if you're down the Great South Channel cod fishing. It's the same type of drive that brings you to either one of those two places. It's fishing in general. It's the challenge against nature. Is trying to catch that fish. Is trying to not only make a living, but trying to work with nature around all those natural elements. And I think that's part of what I was trying to compare to, whether you're brook trout fishing or striper fishing. That's all part of it, is that challenge, that battle, if you will, who's going to win. Sometimes you never know. The fish can spit the hook at the rail. And also it's the, I don't know if you can say it's a battle of wits. You have to kind of know where to find the fish. Are they, is it, what tide is more favorable for them? What are they eating here? Might they be laying behind this little dip in the bottom that I see on my sounding machine? Or, all that information you need to attain to be successful, particularly striper fishing. Well, I think gathering that type of information is number one, just comes from experience, because unless it's maybe a a family member, like your father, a father might teach his son some of those things, but he's not going to teach his best buddy on the shore where he's catching the fish. You know, and that goes through the whole fisheries. I mean, you can see that. I see that constantly today, just shellfishing, cohogging, right? And it's fishing in general. You know, you talk to your best buddy at the coffee shop about the day before fishing, cohogging, any fishery, about where his success was, and he's not going to, you know, he's going to lie to you.
There's already too many people out there. Just COVID, to me, brought so many people out to places where you'd never see them. And now people are all over the place. So you've got to be careful about that. Commercial fishermen, you're trying to make money. You cannot have people learning what you know. And so you have to be very careful what you share. And so it really is pretty fascinating to see that dynamic. And it's tragedy of the commons. It's a limited natural resource that you cannot share all that you know with other people.
I could think of instances where there was some fishermen when I was cod fishing, and they may not have been using their head very well, but they'd have a good catch and they'd be catching codfish hook for hook. And next thing you know, they get on the radio and talk to somebody. Oh, geez, I'm doing really great. I'm over here. And next thing you know, the boats start coming over the horizon. But and I've already said, well, that's okay, because I understand, because it's just part of that thinking. And it's not only shellfish, it's any of the fisheries. It's the same sort of mindset that, you know, you're gonna find your piece of bottom, your spot, and you don't necessarily want to share that with anybody, because if you share it with somebody, you're going to lessen the resource that you have to work from.
Right. So the history of striped bass management goes back a very long ways. It's been an important fish since colonial times. Native Americans set stone weirs to catch them years ago on Cape Cod. So very deep history. In 1869, there was concern over netting of striped bass, and a state legislature tried to put in a bill to ban netting. That failed. And it wasn't until 1945 that netting was banned for striped bass, and it became rod and reel only in Massachusetts.
Well, early in the 20s and earlier than that, there was two, at least, groups in Chatham that were seiners. There'd be seine crews, they were referred to. There was what might have been referred to as the village crew, who might have worked around Monomoy, the east or the west side of Monomoy, with seines, for seining bass, particularly in the summertime. There was another crew up here in Old Harbor that would do the same thing, but their territory was more like up here off of North Beach and up to Nauset. Fairly big operation when you had a 400-yard seine and had to have 3 or 4 boats to operate it and 6 men. And sometimes they'd get as much as 6,000 pounds of bass. And my father could recall seeing them come in to unload at the shanties. Yeah, and they had these great big sugar barrels that they packed them in that could hold 200 or 300 gallons, and only could get 3 or 4 fish into one barrel to be shipped off.
There's a saying among fishermen: bluefish are like catching a speedboat, while stripers are like catching a tugboat.
Yeah, comparing the angling experience with bluefish versus striped bass, bluefish are just very fast, very strong, and they fight hard, and they have very sharp teeth, and so it's, you know, hang on to your seat with bluefish. Striped bass tend to hunker down and just fight hard, but striped bass are a thrill because they can get very large. And so a person has a chance to go out and get a 20, 30, 40-pound striped bass and have the catch of a lifetime. So striped bass is really a thrill. Many kids have had such a great experience catching their first striped bass because it's so much fun to catch a larger size fish like that in the ocean. It's the holy grail is catching a 50-pound striper, and not many people do it, but they're out there. The world record is almost 82 pounds. So there's big striped bass out there, and that's what part of the draw is to catch a real large trophy fish.
And Memorial Day weekend, I remember I had my boat in Stage Harbor, and I think it might have been Memorial Day, and I was out just in the entrance to the harbor, and I was just fooling around fishing, hoping to catch a schoolie. And I actually caught one schoolie, and I was just playing with it along the edge of the boat. I was doing, wild wilder sports, fishing with them, just playing with them, just fooling around, taking my time retrieving them back in. And I got on about from me to Jeff away from the boat, and I see this shadow come from underneath the boat. I go, what the hell is that? And it was a 36-inch bass. And he came right up and he swam around that, and I'm holding the rod still now, and the little schoolie that I caught was hooked. The big guy swam around once, twice, grabbed him, and I had this 36-inch fish on with about 12 feet of line out.
Yeah, so tremendous amount of technique involved in getting large fish and getting lots of fish. And so if you see striped bass and they're feeding on the surface, there's lots of birds. You can see them from a half a mile away. You go to that feeding activity, you throw a lure on the surface, you'll catch one. So that's the easy way. When they're hunkering down and you got the big fish on the bottom, a lot of technique is involved there. And I'd have people be very upset with me if I told too much more about that. In terms of surf casting, I went out a little bit to the backside, which is a world-famous shore fishing place because of striped bass and bluefish, and it's hard. When I was younger, you had to put in your time. The striped bass population was down, they were not as abundant, and you had to spend a lot of time hanging out on the beach at night trying to catch them. It has come back, but now it's down again because we think the activity of the seals. The seals are out there. They're not allowing striped bass to really set up and stage like they used to. So it was a tremendous activity. People would time their vacations for generations to come fish for striped bass on the backside. But it's much diminished from what it used to be. What is the reason why people like to target them at night? I think it's partly the behavior of the fish. They're very active feeding. They ambush prey at night, but also you can fool them at night. They have very good eyesight. They're very aware of their environment. It's hard sometimes to trick striped bass in the daytime. So fishing at night is the best time to catch big ones. So people love to go out there, spend the whole night, and try to get that trophy fish. And then in 1981, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission developed the first striped bass management plan on the East Coast because striped bass populations were in trouble. By 1995, the population was declared to be restored. So one of the most successful management plans on the East Coast. Since then, there's been a little bit of difficulty. In 2019, they were declared overfished again. And right now, this group, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, which has different states partner up to work together, is trying to rebuild the striped bass population once again. Not long ago, you could take anything over 28 inches. And when I was younger, it was 24. And then a few years before that, it was 16. So we keep changing things. Right now, we have a very tight recreational slot. Commercial fishermen in Massachusetts have to have a 35-inch fish or larger. And so that conforms to the broader interstate process for regulating striped bass, and it still gives the public a chance to take home some fish. So it's not always popular, but it does fit into that stock assessment interstate management approach. The regulations were really set years ago with the broad goal of allowing each female the chance to spawn once. And it's been really successful with that fairly simple concept. And so in the present day, we have a recreational size limit of 28 to 31 inches. It's a very tight slot now.
But it used to be 16 inches was the smallest you could keep. And that was a nice size. And my father used to take those and he'd just scale them, head, tail, gut them, cut the fins off of them, and then take the body and just cut it into steaks.
In terms of their physiology and their life history, they're very interesting. So they're diadromous, but they're coming here to feed. So they're one of the few diadromous fish we have that are not here to spawn. They're here to feed. Females are much larger than males. They're called sexually dimorphic. And so the males, they mature at about 3-year-old. They only get to be about 28 inches. Everything larger than that is a female. So all these big trophy fish we pursue are all females. And so the recreational slot of 28 to 31 are going to be mostly females. The commercial slot from 35 up, all females. And they go into these large migrations to take advantage of feeding in the ocean. That's the magic of diadromy. Go to a different place where you can feed very well and grow and gain a large size and have a better spawning opportunity. These fish are born in the Roanoke River, Delaware River, Chesapeake Bay, and then the Hudson River. Then they move up towards Cape Cod to feed in the summertime. And we've learned that we were declining recently. 2019 declared overfished. A little bit of improvement in 2022. The next stock assessment's underway now. It should be revealed later this year to find out how the stock is doing. Probably the number one driver for striped bass population dynamics is fishing. Overfishing causes the population to go down. The second concern people have is over the water quality impacts on their spawning habitat. And so things like pesticide pollution, industrial pollution, acid rain, eutrophication, septic systems. On the Cape, we rely on septic systems for moving our waste into the ground. That impacts spawning habitats. Striped bass don't spawn here, but those impacts do occur down south. Now, you throw in climate change into that mix, warmer water can cause more problems for things like eutrophication. And so we may be seeing less productive spawning habitats for the species and other diatomous fish as we warm up. It's also important to realize that those contaminants are everywhere. They're in us, they're in the ocean. So we have to do a better job of reducing our use of those type of contaminants, herbicides, fertilizers, pesticides. We have to do a better job as a society to reduce the flow of those chemicals into the natural environment. Well, with climate change, there's going to be winners and losers. And so we'll have some southern species come up here in greater abundance, and there'll be different fishing opportunities. But for commercial fishermen that rely on lobster or codfish, enormous impacts. Those fish are moving north. Striped bass right now, Massachusetts still has good access to striped bass. Could that change if we get much warmer? Or will another species come in and fill that role? So it's really, it's I don't know if I want to call it fascinating because it's kind of concerning, but there's a lot going on right now because these ocean waters are warming rapidly. Dads, take their sons out and hopefully their daughters too, and they teach them about boating, about, the ocean, and about the different types of fish. So it's a really deep cultural practice on the Cape. And also, people forget that it's an important part of foraging or sustaining yourself by getting food from the natural environment.
Did you ever fight a fish so much you had to cut the line, it was too much?
Never.